Keith has been immersed in the food and beverage industries, first as a journalist covering commercial bakery trends, and today as an ingredient marketing expert for the National Honey Board. In his current role, Keith spends most of his year traveling the country talking to distillers, brewers, bakers, and food manufacturers about how to make better products with honey. It's his passion, and one that has him working with companies ranging from craft distillers to global food brands. So I'm really looking forward to this. I remember seeing films about honeybees at the Department of Education, you know, with the old film reel in grade school, and how they used to do the dance and communicate and stuff like that. And I'm interested to see what this talk is about honeybees and the National Honey Board. Thank you, Keith.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for attending. I, like most of you, what we talked about earlier, have Zoom fatigue. It seems I spend half of my professional life doing this, whereas I used to spend half of my professional life talking to food and beverage manufacturers, brewers, distillers, retail bakers, all about honey. It's something that I've been doing for the last 9 years. I am not a beekeeper. That's the first thing that people ask me. I would put my bit of knowledge as probably the highest in the States of somebody who knows more about beekeeping but has never actually kept a bee in their life. I simply travel too much to do that. I look forward to doing that once I settle down a little. But no, I do not keep bees. I travel the country talking about honey and honeybees to the food industry. And the whole goal of my work is to make people understand what a precious commodity honeybees are and how important they are, and how whenever you make a decision, whether you're making a, say it's your corner bakery and you're making a loaf of bread, whether you want to put sugar or honey in it, what happens whenever you put honey in it, from a technical perspective to an overall story perspective to an overall helping fund honeybee research. So that's kind of my job. I love doing it, as well as doing stuff like this, just talking to really anybody about bees. There is a ton to cover whenever you talk about honeybees and honey, a ton. I usually do this course over 2 days and spend about 14 hours in educational sessions. I've trimmed that down to a tidy 40 minutes. So if you do have a pressing question, throw it up in the chat. I've become really adept at speaking and monitoring the chat at the same time. So I'd rather kind of answer your question as we're on subject, rather than wait till the end when you may forget it. So feel free to do it, and hopefully I can see those. So who is the National Honey Board? Real quick. We're an industry-funded agriculture group. So we're not taxpayer money at all. We're funded by honey sold in the United States, whether it's from domestic beekeepers or importers. Every pound of honey sold, we get a penny and a quarter, I believe, to try to increase honey usage and try to increase the knowledge people have about honeybees. Because whenever we talk about honey as an ingredient in the food industry, most people think of it's a sweetener. And that's common because that's what we've all been using honey for since we were children, whether it's to sweeten tea, sweeten a bagel. But if you think about honey, it's really way, way more than a sweetener. And it all starts with that honeybee. If you think about the honeybee, and it's not only its lifespan, but its impact on us as a civilization, it's quite astounding. The early evidence of honeybees dates all the way back hundreds of millions of years ago to Myanmar. And these are actual honeybees, because as we'll learn, there's a difference between regular bees and honeybees. So they've been around for hundreds of millions of years, but they really haven't kind of been under human management, meaning people collect them, collect the hives, look for the honey, till around 9,000 years ago, where we see our first evidence of human sort of management of honeybees in the area that's known as Turkey now. In America, we always thought that they were not native to the United States or any of the North America, South America continents. However, we always assumed kind of that they came over with the earliest settlers in the 1600s. However, there is new evidence that says there was a species of honeybee that was native to North America that dates back 10 million years ago, but it went extinct. So there's still some debate over the science of that, but regardless, it is a ridiculously old insect that's been around doing some amazing things. But it's not just some kind of, its age that make it unique. If you look at the honey's role on our food ecosystem, it's quite astounding. Most people think whenever they think of honeybees as, oh, they make honey and they may pollinate. Both true things, but what they don't know is they're responsible for more than 35% of the foods we eat through their pollination efforts. If you take a look at most of our agriculture grown here in the United States, outside of your corn and soybean, mainly your fruits and vegetables and nuts, they require honeybee pollination. It's something that sort of how our world has turned into a mono-agricultural society, to where we find something that grows somewhere and we just plant nothing but that. It's really necessitated the use of honeybees to pollinate all these foods that we eat, and it's more than 35. So all your avocados, your almonds, your celeries, your broccolis, your apples all require this honeybee pollination to kind of get the quantities that we need here in the United States and to help feed the world. Beyond honeybees, honey itself is a pretty amazing substance. Whenever people think of sweeteners, you're mainly thinking of table sugar or maybe some other kind of all-natural sweetener such as monk fruit extract or agave nectar, things like that. For the most part, those are single source carbohydrates, meaning there's a little bit of liquid in them and then a whole lot of carbohydrates, whether it's one type of carbohydrate like sucrose or fructose or glucose, or multiple. Honey's quite different. Honey has over 181 different components. Everything from carbohydrates, yes, which make it sweet, but it also has tons of minerals. It has vitamins, prebiotics, acids, which play a huge role in the flavor of honey, as well as volatile organic compounds. There's native bacteria and yeast. And the amazing thing about it is all these things were put in there by the honeybee or gathered from the nectar. So it's nothing that man has kind of fortified like a loaf of bread, how we fortify bread. We're not fortifying honey. All these wonderful, amazing things are naturally found in the ingredient. The final unique thing about honey, before we really dig into the honeybees, is really the diversity. People sometimes think that, oh, honey is honey, but you need to think of honey more like a wine. There are over 300 varietals of honey here in the United States. If we go worldwide, there's over 3,000 varietals. All these honeys have a different flavor, a different aroma, different aftertaste, different colors, and the only thing that's different about them is where the bees forage for nectar. If you look at those two plants on the picture, they both look like similar kind of white flowering plants. But if you see the color swatches next to them, that's the color of honey they produce. That honey up top, that is a buckwheat flower. So we grow a whole lot of buckwheat here in the United States. Bees love it. There's tons of nectar in these buckwheat blossoms, and it generates a honey. I don't know if anybody's ever had buckwheat honey, but it's almost motor oil. It has a really funky taste. If you ask people to smell it, they'll say anywhere between the cross of a barn to a wet horse to tobacco or leather. Some people find it completely unappealing. I find it very appealing. I love strong flavors, and it's got this really funky taste to it, almost not sweet at all. Where conversely, if you see the flower below it, that's an orange blossom flower. So this will produce orange blossom honey, which is super light. It's kind of indicative of the honey that we're familiar with here in the Midwest, except it has a little bit of a citrus back note on it. And again, this is nothing that is added to these honeys to make them this way. It's simply the diet of the bees. So let's dig right into bees because they are kind of the main topic of conversation today. And if you think about the life of a honeybee, it's extraordinarily short, especially during the summertime. Your typical bee is only going to live about 4 to 6 weeks. But what they accomplish in those 4 to 6 weeks, both for their family and for pollination efforts and feeding the world and for producing honey, is quite astounding. So bees are born as an egg is laid, that egg develops into a larva. The queen lays the eggs, as you can see, the little larva swimming around in the honeycomb cell. And it takes about 4 days for that egg to hatch into a larva. Why I say swimming around in that honeycomb cell is because there's a whole mess of food in there. Before the egg is laid, they put what's called bee bread in there, which is a combination of pollen, honey, all sorts of good things, propolis, that's designed to kind of feed that bee as it goes from larva stage to adult stage. Between soaking it in from the food around it and from getting fed by worker bees, that bee is going to eat about 1,300 meals a day, which, if you think about it, is an astounding amount of food for something so small. Because it eats so much food, it's going to grow to about 1,500 times its original size in 5 days. So it's a pretty rapid development inside that cell. Once it's been fed all of its foods, there's a wax cap that's put over that, and that allows the bee to fully develop inside of a protected comb, inside of a protected cell. After it fully develops, it chews through its own wax comb, and it enters the world. We always say it's a girl because 99.999% of the bees born into the world are female bees, which we'll learn why that is later. So what's amazing about watching a honeybee being born, because it happens quite frequently in the summer, whenever you're going through hives, you see it all the time, is there's a reason why female bees are called worker bees. As soon as that bee chews through that wax cap, it immediately sticks its head in and starts basically cleaning the cell it came through, getting ready for the next egg to be laid in there. Then it immediately gets to work. Bees are born to work. It's in their innate nature that they don't need to come out, be coddled, figure out the way of the hive. They come out ready to work and get to work they do. But they don't leave the hive for a while. They're going to spend about 11 days inside of that beehive doing various jobs. Bees practice something called age polyethism. What age polyethism means is you don't determine your role inside of the hive based on what you want to do or what you're good at. It's purely based on your age. So whenever you're first born, you do all the worst jobs because you're the low bee on the totem pole. And then as you get older, you acquire more skills and more responsibility until finally, after about 11 days, you become a forager, which foraging is really the pinnacle of the bee world. That is the most important role, because whenever they're foraging, they're bringing food back to their family in the form of a carbohydrate source, which is the nectar from the flower, a pollen source, which is a protein, and then water as well. Bees are going to spend about 10 days foraging for food for their hive. And they're literally going to work themselves to death. They're going to visit about 20,000 different flowers during their 10 days gathering nectar. And that's going to total about 500 miles flown. And bees work so hard, like I said, they work themselves to death. So their cells don't have time to regenerate like ours do if we don't get a lot of sleep one night, or say we had one too many cocktails out at the bar and we wake up feeling groggy the next morning. We can sleep that off. Bees can't. After about 500 miles in their wings start to fail, and there's no way to recover them. So that bee will die after about 500 miles. In this whole lifespan, they're only producing 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey. So whenever you think about honey you've bought either at the supermarket, at the farmer's market, and it gets down to the last little bit of a drop, definitely don't throw it away. Savor every ounce of that honey, because of how many bees it took to provide just 1 teaspoon is 12 bees' lifetime work. So it's a pretty interesting life they lead. And it's pretty unique too, because whenever you look at the world of bees, there's over 20,000 different types of bees in the world, but only 7 species of honeybees. Here in North America, we mainly see 3 different types of honeybees. We have our European or Western honeybees, our Italian honeybees, which is a beekeeper favorite because they're very docile bees. Beekeepers love those because they're not as aggressive. They make honey like the other bees, but if you get like the Africanized honeybees, which people wrongly call them killer bees, they're not killer bees. They don't kill you if they sting you. They're just a more aggressive honeybee. So it's something that, you know, beekeepers have a choice what they want to keep, and those Italian honeybees are pretty big favorites because they are docile and they're not as susceptible to cold weather as some other bees. So out of 20,000 different species, what makes the 7 honeybees so unique? There's 3 things. First of all, it has 2 stomachs. One normal stomach, which is for digestion, and a secondary stomach, which is their honey sac. This is where they put the nectar in as soon as they extract it from a flower. It's full of enzymes in there that immediately start breaking down the nectar, the sugars in nectar, and converting it into what we know as honey. What else is interesting about honeybees is they live in colonies just like ants and termites. So you'll see solo carpenter bees, masonry bees, bumblebees. They'll be off on their own, living on their own. With honeybees, they always live in a family. It's a family structure with a mom, a bunch of daughters, and a few sons, and they always go back to that same hive after their foraging trips, and that's where they stay their whole lives. Honeybees also have the ability to not only make honey, but to store honey. And that's crucial because where they get their food sources from flowers. And as we know, especially most of you being up in the northern Illinois and Chicago area, there's not a lot of flowers blooming at this time, so there's no food. So that's why bees, it's so important that they have the ability to make honey, basically take this nectar, which is an unstable substance, and convert it into a stable ingredient that will keep all winter long and that they can feed on. This is what your beekeeper looks like. You know, you may not think it, but there really is no such thing. There's a lot of impressions that there's such a thing as big honey in this world, that there's these massive fields full of hundreds of thousands of hives, but the land just doesn't support it. This is what your typical commercial beekeeper looks like. He's a farmer. Most likely he's multi-generational. This is one of our largest beekeepers here in North America. He's 3rd generation, and his kids will take over to be 4th generation. And this is one of his bee yards up in North Dakota. And as you can see, they're not very big just because, you know, there's only a certain amount of forage area in a given area. So you can't just cram hundreds and hundreds of millions of bees in there, or there won't be enough food for them, and that'll kill off the hive, which is obviously not what we want. So beekeepers operate by putting sort of bee yards where the land will sustain it, and also where crops are needed to get pollinated. It's a little bit of juggling. Some beekeepers don't do pollination at all. They're just in it to make honey, and others do pollination at certain times of the year and honey at other times of the year. If you look about a colony of bees, it's one of those vertical rows of boxes. Whether there's 2 boxes stacked on top of each other or 6, that's one family of bees inside of there. If you look about what makes up one family of bees, in the summertime, it's going to be about 60,000 bees living in those hives. And as you can see from the breakdown, it's very female dominated. In the summertime, there's going to be 1 mom bee. So in that whole hive, there's 1 queen. There can only be 1 egg layer. She is the mother to every single bee in there. In her lifetime, she's going to give birth about 1 million times. During the summer months, about once every 45 seconds. If she lays an egg and she fertilizes it, it is going to be a female bee. If she doesn't fertilize it, it's going to be a male bee. Compare this to what the hives look like right now. We're almost seeing coming out of winter, but still there's no flowers blooming. Right now, the hive is quite different makeup. There's no male bees inside of that beehive. There's still that 1 mom bee, and there's only about 20,000 female bees. Now, why this is because whenever it's summertime, there needs to be a lot of workers, because workers are going out, gathering, foraging for food, bringing it back to the hive. During the winter, there's no need for that. And if you have 60,000 bees inside of that hive during winter, what are they going to do? They're going to run all the food out of scarcity. So they pare down the size of their hive over winter just for the necessity. Now, what's that necessity of bees doing during the winter? Why do you need those 20,000? Basically, their sole goal is to keep the queen warm during winter. Since she's the sole egg layer, her lifespan is going to be about 3 to 5 years, which is pretty amazing for an insect. Why she's able to live so long is because she only leaves the hive one time in her life. So after the queen is born, she'll leave the hive once, mate with as many drones as possible, get 1,000,000 eggs, and go back to the hive and do nothing but lay eggs for the rest of her life. So over the wintertime, honeybees aren't hibernating. You don't see them out and about because they're like us, they don't like cold, and there's no food out there. So all they're going to do is waste their energy if they fly out during the winter. So they don't go into hibernate. They go into a very active pattern called a winter cluster. And this cluster starts when the temperature hits around 57 degrees. And what it is just like it looks in the picture. It's like a circular ball. Inside of the middle of that ball of bees is the queen bee. And then the other bees basically rotate in and out, keeping that queen warm by flapping their wings. On the edges of that cluster, it's going to be about 50 degrees, whereas they generate so much heat at the center where that queen is, it's going to be upwards of 90 degrees. It's pretty amazing whenever you look at it through infrared, how you can see this massive heat ball of where the bees are keeping the queen warm. And it's a rotating pattern. So the bees go in the middle to, get the work out, and then they go to the outside where the honey is stored, where they release their water vapor, get it out, eat some honey to get more energy, and to go back onto the middle. We got a question. How does the hive decrease so many bees in winter? Is there some kind of genocide? Yes and no. There's not a female bee genocide. Their lifespan is only 4 to 6 weeks. So the queen, once winter starts coming and the flowers stop blooming, the queen will stop laying eggs. So she'll slow down her egg production, and just the bees that are out there will automatically start dying off as they go grab the last bit of nectar, and they won't be replaced. Where there is genocide, although you may call it homicide, is the male bees. So we notice how there was 0 male bees during the male months, or during the winter months. And this is because male bees don't work. Male bees' only role and only job, and the only thing they do, is mate with the queen. If they're successful at mating with the queen, it kills them immediately. If they're not successful, all they do is hang out in the hive all summer, getting fat, eating honey. Over the winter, there's not as much honey, and they don't want the male bees in the hive eating all the food while they do all the work. So right whenever the temperature starts getting below 55 degrees, you can actually see pictures of it where the female bees will be grabbing the male bees, throwing them out of the hive, and then blocking the entrance of the hive so they can't get back in. So essentially starving them to death or freezing them to death because they don't know how to get food themselves or to live by themselves. So they do kill all the male bees off in the wintertime because they know all they're going to do is eat all their food. So up in Chicago, where you have a lot of snow on the ground, if you do go to see beehives, you will see during the winter months, especially now with this bit of a warm snap we've had, you'll see this coloring outside of the beehive. What this is there's any time the weather gets a little bit warmer, those bees will fly out, evacuate, basically release their waste, and then fly back in. That's why during wintertime, you can see kind of these markings outside of the hive. So that's a little bit about honeybees and what they do during the winter. Let's talk about how they make honey. Okay, we got another question. From an ecological perspective, Illinois has dozens of native species of bees and bumblebees. The honeybees today you mentioned are non-native. Do honeybees compete with native bees and displace them? No, there's been no scientific studies that have said, or conclusive evidence whatsoever that says that honeybees are replacing any of the native pollinators, whether they be bumblebees, carpenter bees, or things like butterflies. There's always concern about how we're pollinating our food. And there's organizations out there that that kind of promote that messaging. But there's never been any scientific evidence that said that's exactly happened. So from an ecological standpoint, there's really no evidence that, I mean, they're all competing for food to an extent, but there's no evidence. I don't think we have enough honeybees here in the United States to really compete. As we'll learn later, our honeybee population is dwindling, which isn't a good thing. So displacing native bees, I don't think is the main issue. And then plus, it's kind of a thing of, if the way we've set up this world, not we, I guess we all contributed to it, and how we feed a lot of the world from the United States, it would be pretty difficult to continue to do that. You have to make one kind of choice or another, whether people are going to stop eating avocados other than, say 2 months of a year, and strawberries 1 month, or, how are we going to handle that? It's definitely a balance, and it's definitely something that's always a concern. But no, I've heard the concerns about honeybees, and I've never seen any of the scientific evidence or research says that they do displace native pollinators. So it's a good question, though. How bees turn nectar into honey, because nectar isn't honey. If nectar was honey, I'm sure, knowing our society, we'd probably just plow down all the flowers, get the nectar, and sell it as a sweetener. What happens is it takes 5 steps to get nectar to honey, almost all of which are done by bees. It all starts with that flower. As I stated earlier, a flower has 2 different components in it that interest bees. They want a carbohydrate source of food, and they want a protein source of food. They're just like humans. Those are the building blocks of life and of sustenance, and they're getting that from a flower. They get the carbohydrates from the nectary glands, which they extract into their honey stomach. Now, as soon as their proboscis goes into that nectary gland, it immediately is able to analyze if this is a good source of nectar or not. If it does realize it's a good source of nectar, then it's going to go back and tell all of her friends where this food is. It's going to store it in its secondary stomach, and then the little hairs on its body are going to collect the pollen. That pollen is a protein source. So this is also going to go back to the hive to feed the bees. So inside of that bee's stomach is an enzyme called invertase. And I won't get too geeky on the science unless somebody wants to. But what invertase does is it's really important, because nectar is mainly sucrose, which is a complex carbohydrate. It's a disaccharide. What this enzyme does is it breaks down that sucrose into fructose and glucose, which are 2 simple sugars. This allows it to be more easily digestible by the honeybees. So that bee gets it, puts it in its stomach, and then flies back to the hive. Once it gets back to the hive, it doesn't immediately deposit that honey or that nectar into a little cell. What it does instead is it regurgitates it from its stomach into another bee's mouth. That bee chews it for about 3 or 4 minutes, then passes it to another bee's mouth, who chews it for another 3 to 4 minutes. Each time this is happening, they're adding different bacterias, different yeasts, different enzymes that are triggering this reaction that's converting this substance to honey. It's going to go for about 20 minutes and pass through about 6 bees. Once it goes through this point, it's deposited inside of that little hexagon cell. At this point, it's still not honey. It's what you call unripened honey. Now, why it's called unripened honey is because the moisture content is about 60% water. What's going to happen at 60% water is, over time, it's either going to start growing mold and it's going to spoil, or it's going to ferment and turn into alcohol. Neither of the things the bees want. So what the bees will do is they'll fan their wings over this unripened honey and evaporate the moisture till exactly 17.1% water content. At 17.1 water percent content, bees know that they have a perfect ingredient. And by perfect, I mean it's 100% stable. So in theory, as long as it's kept airtight, that honey will last forever. It's why you always hear stories about how honey never goes bad. It's because it's such a super saturated substance with a low enough water activity and high enough acids and other things in it that it should never spoil. So once it gets to that 17.1% moisture content, they put a cap on it, and that is their food supply for the winter time. Now, honeybees don't know how to do anything other than make honey. So they will make honey as much as they possibly can. It's only physically possible for a honeybee hive to eat about 50 to 60 pounds of honey over the winter, but the average honeybee hive will make about 120 pounds of honey. This is where the beekeeper comes in. The beekeeper's main role is to understand sort of how how much honey their bees need for the winter. So if I'm a beekeeper in Chicago, my winters are really long. So I'm erring on the side of probably keeping 70 pounds of honey in the hive for winter. Whereas if I'm in, let's say, somewhere where it's much more cooler, like New Mexico or Texas, where the winters are much shorter, they don't have to keep as much honey because there's more honey access to it year around. So the beekeeper will take the honey that the bees aren't going to have, and that's the honey that we use then, where you buy at the supermarket, you buy at the farmer's market, it's in your foods, things like that. I had a question. Does anyone know how the bees know that the honey is at 17.1%? No. Bees are insanely intelligent, and it's one thing that's just innate in their biology and how they've evolved, is that they know exactly when they get that honey to a water percentage to where it's flowable, meaning it's not going to turn into a crystallized solid, so it's easily digestible for them, but to where it's not going to spoil. The big recent study out is, the fact that honeybees outside of humans are the only insect or animal that understands the concept of zero, meaning no number versus a number. I read this scientific paper. It was the most complex thing I've ever read in my entire life, but it was the first time that I think outside of primates too, that they understand concepts of numbers, which is a really interesting thing. So they're pretty amazing and intelligent animals. They also have a language, which outside of humans and primates are the only language that we understand, which is called the waggle dance, which the waggle dance is what they use to tell their fellow bees where the food is. So every morning, if you go see a beehive, you'll see bees flying out of the hive. These are your elite bees. Think of them as the blue angels of the bee world. They're called scout bees, and they're gonna go find where the food is for their family. Now, they don't send all the bees out there, because what does foraging for nectar do? It costs a lot of energy. You've got a limited amount of miles, so you wanna be, you wanna be as safe as possible and conserve as much energy as possible. So these forager bees, these scout bees, will go out, find the nectar. Once they find it, they're going to fly straight back to the hive. As they fly back to the hive, they look at three things: the position of the sun versus the relation to the hive. Say it's at 70 degrees in the sky. They're going to go back to the hive and go to a place called the dance floor. The dance floor is an area where all the other female forager bees are waiting for these scout bees to come. The scout bee is going to go and do a figure eight dance. The way that direction that figure eight is tilted. So say the source of food was 50 degrees the high from the sun, then they're going to tilt it 50 degrees. That's going to tell the bees, okay, as soon as you leave the hive, find the sun and go 50 degrees. And that's where the food source is. In the middle, whenever they do the actual shape, the middle part of a figure eight is going to connote how far it is by the intensity of it, and if there's any vertical landmarks. So they're literally going back and saying to their fellow sister bees, hey, there's a great patch of clover. It is 40 degrees from the sun, and it's about half a mile, and there's a big red barn on the right-hand side. And that's how they efficiently tell each other where the food is. So it's pretty amazing. Got another question. What is the difference between raw honey and processed honey? Is one safer than the other? This is another thing that there's really no definitions. So there's no official definition of what raw is or what processed honey is. Uh, People call raw honey a specific thing, but if I was making honey at home, I could call it raw. If the largest commercial beekeeper in the country was making honey, they could call it raw. There's no official definition. People tend to think that it's a matter of filtering. All beekeepers have to filter their honey for some reason or the other, because you don't want parts of the hive to get in, whether it's wood or a dead bee or something like that. Most people don't want to see dead bees floating around in their honey. And in terms of processed honey, I'm not sure what that exactly means. The only processing that's really done would be if you considered filtering, like I said, to get that part out. That could be processing. Some beekeepers will also slightly heat it to about 100 degrees just to make it more flowable in the body and in the bottle. But there's really no other processing that goes along. The sole kind of thing that the beekeeper has to do is figure out how to get it out of the hive, extract it, and into the bottle. And I've got pictures of this to show you kind of what that looks like. So these are honey frames. So they remove the honey frames from the hive in fall time, and first job is you have to get that wax cap off. So they put that wax on there that says this is where the honey goes, it's protected. So how do we get that off? If I'm a backyard beekeeper, I've got what's called a hot knife. It's a big knife I plug into the wall, it heats up, and then I scrape off that wax cap. If I'm a commercial beekeeper, like I said, this is one of our largest commercial beekeepers. It's kind of operates like a craft brewery. 8 to 10 people, a lot of manual hands-on labor, and really their goal is to protect the integrity of the product. So what they do on a scale that's bigger is it's the same concept, but it's a little more automated. So they'll put these frames through this machine. This machine just has a knife that's down it, that's heated, and it scrapes the wax cap off. The wax that it scrapes off is used for candles, for medicines, for cosmetics, things like that. Once those frames go through that no longer have the wax, we have to figure out how do we get them out of that frame of honey. So she's going to load them all up into this larger frame, which is then put into a centrifuge. So then he's going to close the hood. There's a red button he hits, and it spins it around. Because honey is heavy, honey's going to get flown to the outside, and it's going to fall down to the bottom. This is where the beekeeper will put either some kind of wire mesh screen or some kind of filter or catch to make sure parts of that honeycomb don't get in there, unless they're making a combed honey, which is honey which has comb in it, or you don't want parts of the wood frame getting in there. Or as you can see, it's a pretty messy job. There could be dead bees in there as well, and they obviously don't want those in the honey as well. The question, what happens to the bees when you take the frames? Nothing. When you take the frames, that's their surplus. So if we go back to think of those six, those big vertical box of hives, and there's 6 boxes, one on top of each other, or say 5 boxes or 4 boxes. The boxes on top are honey supers. This is where all the honey is stored. And then the box below is kind of where the bees live, where the baby bees are born. So over the winter, the beekeeper will take those access to boxes off the top that are the honey stores, and then the bees will just retreat down to the bottom. There's only going to be 20,000, so they don't need a lot of room. So you don't want to leave all those boxes on top, because if you left all those boxes on top, that's a whole lot more of an area that they have to keep warm. So you want to kind of pare your box size down just to where it's easier for them to have enough honey, to have enough area to keep the queen warm, but not to be excessive. So this is kind of the biggest job of the beekeeper. because I mean, if the bees are their their product, if they are mishandle their bees, if they take too much honey, then they lose a hive, they lose money. No farmer wants to lose money, no beekeeper wants to lose their bees. So whenever you take the frames of honey, it doesn't hurt them. It's pretty amazing whenever you go out. Bees are pretty nonplussed by humans going in there and grabbing the frames of honey. They kind of just go about their day as long as you're not violent towards them. They don't, kind of go after. Another questions. If bees didn't have commercial hives to live in, where would they have their colony? They would have it kind of what you see in Winnie the Pooh. They would have it in a abandoned tree log. They would have it on the inside of a cave if you're in an area where there's caves. They would basically put it anywhere that's a tight, constrained space that's sort of protected from the elements. Unfortunately, due to environmental issues in this country and around the world, we rarely have feral bee colonies now. Feral bee colonies used to be way more predominant. You used to be able to take a walk through the forest and see a beehive up in a tree or something like that. You don't see those much anymore, simply because our bee numbers are dwindling, and it's harder for those feral colonies to survive, because as Americans and as most of the world's, we have well manicured lawns, and we grow a lot of corn and soybean and wheat. And we've created massive bee deserts, pollinator deserts throughout our country and throughout the world, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So you will see feral bee colonies every once in a while, but they're rarer and rarer every day, just due to the fact that they would rather live in a nice warm home, and they have a better chance for survival if they're living in a hive versus living out somewhere else. Okay, so that's how honey's made. Real quick peek of what the honey industry looks like in the USA. We've got about 2.8 million colonies that make about 157 million pounds of honey a year. The average yield per colony used to be about 60 pounds. Now it's down to 55.8. That's due to the forage area bees have, just isn't producing as much nectar as it used to, as well as beekeepers being much more conservative in the honey they take for our use to make sure the bees have enough. If you look at bees, like I said earlier, they're either going to sell honey or they're going to sell their pollination services. So it's kind of a mixture of both. Where we have the most honeybees at and where the most honey produced in this country may surprise people, but it's North Dakota and Montana, and then South Dakota at number 4. Why those areas are so popular for bees is because we haven't ruined those areas yet. I hate to be so blunt, but if you think about what's going on in North Dakota, Montana, and South Dakota, it's nothing. Nothing's going on. There's not sprawling suburbs. There's not dedicated crops. I live down in the St. Louis area. I actually live in a town called Edwardsville in Illinois. It's 4.5-hour drive to Chicago. Corn on one side of the road, soybean on the other. Great for feeding the world. Terrible for feeding honeybees. And that's why honeybees do not thrive here in Illinois, whereas North Dakota, Montana, and South Dakota, they do thrive. Fields of wildflowers, trees that flower, shrubs, weeds, all these great things, untouched land that the bees just absolutely love. California and Florida are also big because those are huge agriculture states that grow crops that require honeybee pollination. Things like almonds, avocados, oranges, all those things are grown in those 2 states, and all those things require honeybee pollination. So we're producing about 157 million pounds of honey here in the United States. In Illinois, our contribution is bleak, and it's mainly because we've decided to make Illinois an agricultural state for mainly soybeans and corn. So we only have about 11,000 hives here in the United States. We're making about 39 pounds of honey per hive, and our honey production is shy of 500,000 pounds. This ranks Illinois in the bottom third of the honey producing states. And it's mainly from what I talked about. The whole middle part of our country, of our state, I mean, is pretty much a bee desert because it's been turned over to soybeans and corn and crops that don't provide food for the honeybees. So more and more of the US is turning into that, which is why we import about 2/3 of the honey we consume here in the United States. So we make about 157 million pounds, but we import upwards of 400 million pounds of honey a year. So our total consumption of honey here in the United States is about 609 million pounds. Now, whenever you think of imported honey, people naturally think, oh my God, is this bad honey? I don't want imported honey. But if you think about it, we can't produce organic honey here in the United States. Honeybees can forage 4 miles from their hive. There's really not an area in the United States where you can go 4 square miles and say, nobody sprayed any pesticides, there's been no drift, there's been no Roundup, there's been no genetically modified organisms. Whereas conversely, we're importing tons of organic honey from South America. Why South America? Is because they're putting their hives out in the middle of the rainforest. There's no crops growing there. It's just flowers, and they're producing some of the most amazing honeys in the world. We're also seeing a lot of honey growth in India. If you think about India, you think of, oh, it's a very populous country. But no, its city centers are insanely populous, but India is pretty desolate outside. And it used to be a big farming country, but due to climate change, a lot of these villages can't farm like they used to. The crops just don't grow. But what does grow is wildflowers, is things that bees love. So they are making a lot of honey in those places as farmers have switched to beekeepers to try to kind of feed the world because honey is in such demand. The process they're using in all those other places is similar to ours. The beekeepers look different, but they're all basically extracting that honey without manipulating it. By definition, if the honey is manipulated or changed in any manner, it's no longer considered honey. And if you sell it as such, it's considered fraud. So you see various products out on the marketplace that I love, but aren't technically honey, like Mike's Hot Honey. It's honey infused with chilies and all sorts of spices. It's amazing. You put it on pizza, but it's not honey anymore because it's not a 100% pure ingredient. To be called honey, it has to be 100% pure. So those are some of the countries. And as you can see, the economics of honey production in the US, it's going down to kind of stabilizing a bit, whereas where we're importing it is going up. Just because of the demand for honey in this country as an all natural and unprocessed sweetener is getting food manufacturers to reformulate their products, to remove the high fructose corn syrup, to remove the sugar, things like that are heavily processed, brown rice syrup, and put honey in instead, which is why we're seeing such a demand for the ingredient. So real quick on pollination, which is important to talk about. So that's a bee, all its little hairs on its body, and as it's extracting the nectar, it's collecting all these wonderful pollen molecules. If you look at honeybee and what they contribute to our food ecosystem, it's really jaw-dropping. Of 115 most important food crops, honeybees who pollinate 87 of them. Everything from fruits to nuts to seeds to vegetables. About 1/3 of our diet is derived from honeybee pollination, or $3 trillion worth of agricultural products. Or if you think about it, about 35% of the calories we consume are thanks to a honeybee. And it's quite a long list of products that honeybees pollinate. Everything from the ingredients that we know, such as everybody knows now, almonds are pollinated by honeybees. Most people know things like oranges are, but you also have bell peppers, macadamia nuts, lemons. Some of these things aren't pollinated 100% by honeybees, but honeybees help increase yields, improve quality, all those things. To really kind of show it in a picturesque statement, Whole Foods did a big promo about 10 years ago in their supermarket in Rhode Island, where they overnight they removed all the food that required honeybee pollination. And as you can see, it's quite shocking what the produce aisle and the dairy aisle would look like without honeybee pollination. And because of this, that's why we have commercial beekeepers who have to transport their bees all over the country in trucks to pollinate these crops. It's not something that I guess anybody in the bee industry wants to do. It's hard work. It's stressful on the bees. But it's again that decision of you have to feed a population, and how are you going to do that? And the most efficient and best way is through honeybees. Colony collapse disorder is something that I'm sure we'll get a lot of questions on. I'll go over it quickly unless people have specific questions on it. Our bees are dying because there's poor nutrition, basically because we just plant stuff like corn and soybean. The food sources they do get are full of pesticides for the most part, which damages them. And then their natural enemies are parasites and pathogens that they've always fought, but it's a lot harder to fight those battles whenever you have a weakened immune system. It's especially an issue here in Illinois. If you look at Illinois' total honeybee loss, it's pretty astounding. We lost 38% of our bees last year, and that's not acceptable. And that's just because we don't have good forage area here in Illinois. So real quick to end, what you can do about it is a couple different things. The big thing is fight to either convert vacant lands into grasslands, wetlands, shrubs, or fight to stop the conversion of these areas into crops. If you look at right in the Midwest, right where we are, this colored thing, we have lost an obscene amount of acres, over 23 million acres that were prime honeybee, native bee, butterfly forage area. We've lost it to crops that do not produce nectar like corn, soybean, and wheat. And it's a bad problem because this area is where 60% of the commercial bees are spending their summer. So this is why we need groups like yours to sort of have this as a focus. As you know, I heard about planting the milkweed. That's fantastic. That's what we need. We need every bit of well-manicured lawn that park districts own that nobody plays on to be mowed over that green grass and put in milkweed and star thistle. And the thing is it's really easy to do. All you need to do is plant the right seed mix. And there's groups like this Seed for Bees group that's run through Project Apis M, where a group like yours, if you have land, you can call them and they'll send you free seed to basically convert that land into bee forage area. So it's something that you can do on a large scale or in your own community. I run a local education effort through my community where I put Pollinator Garden up in the community gardens just to educate people about, this is all you need to do in your yard is don't spray it. Don't worry about your green grass. Instead, plant wildflowers and then educate them and then leave bees alone. In terms of planting a pollinator garden, if everybody had a pollinator garden, a lot of our problems would be solved. And it's quite easy. Native plants is what we're looking for. You're going to want to think about whenever you design your garden that you want to plant in clusters. So you don't want to put one buckbush in there. You're going to want to put a couple because we're going to want to attract quantity of bees. You also need to think about whenever you plant your pollinator garden is the seasons. So you want plants that bloom in spring, summer, and fall, because then that'll allow bees to have a food source year round. And then of course, don't forget the water because bees need water as well. There's a special mix if your group is interested or if you're interested personally that you can order. And like I said, this organization will most likely send this this mix of seeds to you for free. If you have land, you can apply to get it, and it's pretty easy to do it. And this is kind of the ideal mix for Illinois of seeding an area for native pollinators, for honeybees, for basically any pollinators in the area. And I'll make sure that everybody has access to this presentation. So, you don't have to worry about writing this stuff down. I'll send it over so you can use it as you see fit. There's also a URL in there where you can get your specific flowers that grow in Illinois, and that kind of stuff. So that's it kind of. I'm going to go through these questions. Do bees use milkweed? Yes, milkweed is something that bees will gather nectar from. The half of native plants, yeah, that is something that you do have to supplement with some non-native plants. And that's essentially you don't have to, but if you want to create the perfect mix to where they have a year-round forage, and there's a diversity of food sources, what you really want, it's something that you're going to want a really solid mix of plants. And sometimes you have to go with non-native species to get there. How is their genetic diversity if the one queen produces all of the eggs? Even if she mates with different drones, they come from her eggs. That is correct. So she will want to mate with different drones. That's the first thing. So whenever the queen leaves, she'll fly away from her hive because she does not want to mate within her bloodline. And then whenever she goes back, there is no genetic diversity among the bees once they're born. But the sperm she gets from all the males, she wants to mate with as many males from as different hives. So there is that genetic diversity. She'll want to try to mate with at least 20 different males to get, so she makes sure she has a strong kind of brood stock. So that's something that, the family line is going to be the same in the hive. But whenever that queen mates, she is mating outside of her family with as many possible. Any other questions? And feel free to hop on and ask me a question in voice too. I know I cover a whole lot of ground in a whole short amount of time, so I'm more than willing to answer other questions.
So I have a question too. Just a practical question. When you talk about having people gardens, have pollinator gardens. If bees only fly within a 4-mile radius, if you're not near a hive, what is the benefit of putting pollinator garden in your home if you're not near a hive? Who's going to be appreciating that?
Two things. Native bees will, butterflies will. So it's not just for honeybees.
Okay.
So all sorts of bees will benefit from it, as well as I'm pretty sure with the rise of backyard and hobbyist beekeeping, I'm pretty sure you probably have about 100 hives, maybe within 4 square miles. I live in a college town, and it's kind of typical suburban outside of a big city. And I know in my neighborhood of about 40 houses, there's 3 of them that have beehives that you could not tell other than the fact that I've been in their backyards and seen their beehives. So there's a lot out there now. It's turned into quite the hobby for people, which is great. But it's not just honeybees, it's those butterflies, it's hummingbirds, it's everything that is going to help pollinate.
I had a question, Keith. With the there's a lot of talk about urban farming and farming vertically, and structures. There's several ways to look at it. What about, if only farmers could convert their land to like natural prairie here in Illinois like it used to be, and then have vertical structures for growing food, or do that. Is there any talk about converting that land back to the way it was naturally, and farmers still being able to produce food vertically, or at least doing half and half or something?
Yeah, there's talk. I think that's moonshot. 100 years down the road, I just don't think our farmers are going to move that quick. The bigger thing is, I think we need to do is, if you think about a farm, and if you just think about driving down 55 or out, the crops don't grow to the roadside. There is a pretty significant shoulder area that's usually just grass or dead grass. Think about along the highways. Out in California, the wine country has started to do a really good job where bees don't pollinate grapevines. They don't care about them. They don't flower. They don't have nectar. But winemakers are farmers. They're grape growers. They understand the importance of bees. So they've started converting the land in between their fields into wildflowers. If we had all the farmers in Illinois say the land that separates fields or separates a field from the road, till it once, till it twice, plant wildflower seeds, the ability for bees to start thriving again in Illinois increase exponentially. It's just that as the way a farmer looks at it, that's an expense. I have to buy seed, and right now I don't have to do anything, and am I going to have to tend to it? And do I want bees buzzing around me? So it's just a big education project to do that. So I think the focus is now is to get those incremental change because we know big food doesn't like change, and they're not going to change rapidly. So if we can get them to think about planting wildflowers in between their fields, that alone is going to create a bee kind of highway to where even if it's a miles and miles of soybean, at least there's a path for them to kind of find food.
Looks like Denise has got a question. When is the best time to start planting these flowers in our garden?
I would talk to your local nursery about that. I hate to give out flower advice just because what I planted in my pollinator garden, there was very specific times to do all that. So it's going to be dependent on a lot that. I find if you have a good nursery by you, they have this knowledge. They know this knowledge. I just went into my nursery whenever I first started doing this. I did tons of research and went in with a plan. And then I went to the nursery and they said, okay, that's a plan that'll work, but this is going to work 10 times better, and set me up with everything I needed. I used a combination of buying plants as well as putting in seeds, just because since it was an educational garden, I wanted something in year one to show for it. And if you plant a huge field of wildflowers, it takes a while for it to get to what you consider a beautiful field. So I would, if you're doing it at home, I would suggest a mixture of plants and seeds. I have another question. Do bees eat the pollen back at the hive? They do. They eat some of it. They pack it in to that little, it's called bee bread. And it's this, the source of food where they pack it into the honeycomb where the larva swims around in it. And it's just kind of their protein source, as well as they pack it in other areas of the cells where you'll have some cells that are for baby bees, others that have pollen in them, and then some that have honey in them. And do they leave some behind? Yeah, they don't gather all the pollen, but whenever they grab some and take it from one flower to the next, that's them pollinating and giving us all this wonderful food. And then the rest they take back to the hive.
Great. Well, I had a couple of comments too. I love buckwheat honey. It tastes like Guinness Stout. I remember
A little bit.
drink Guinness Stout a long time ago. And when we were meeting in person, I used to have literature table out, for our program meetings, and we had a packet of bee pollinator seeds, and so. Hopefully that we could do that again sometime soon, and I've still got some, and I'm gonna try to plant some this spring.
Yeah.
If there's, go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, maybe Kathy should jump in here and talk about whatever she's ready to talk about giving out milkweed seeds to people.
It's a good idea. Kathy?
Well, we're just meeting this week with my committee just to figure out the best way to do that. Yeah, if anybody has any good ideas or has any resources, we're open to that if you want to contact us at our email address. But We're thinking of maybe doing something at the libraries. We're thinking of maybe doing some talks with garden groups. We just haven't decided quite yet, but our packets are ready to go.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Linda's got a question. Linda Kemper.
Yeah, this is Kim Kemper. Do you hear my voice?
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we're living now in northern Michigan, right on Lake Michigan, right near Traverse City. And 3 or 4 years ago, we used to have lots and lots of honeybees. Suddenly, the next year, they disappeared. And we have a lot of cherry orchards right around us and apple orchards as well. What happened to the honeybees, do you think?
Who knows? That's the whole issue with colony collapse disorder is it's not a silver bullet. It's not one thing. It's a combination of factors. Most likely, it was probably something environmental. So a pesticide could have saturated certain crops, and that's where the bees went, and it killed them. Or there could have been a bad sort of disease go through the hives there, something like there's something called European foul brood that's a really bad disease, or varroa mites, which is the biggest challenge beekeepers have. It's this little mite that that attaches itself to a bee and sucks out, kills it, gives it disease. So any of those things could have happened, and that's the real challenging part about what we're dealing with. Is it's a combination of everything. If it was a silver bullet that said this is why the bees are dying, we could fix it. But since it's a combination of things, and neonicotinoids, which is a pesticide class, are known to kill bees, and they used to be banned, and that ban was lifted in the last administration. So there's a substance being sprayed on crops that we know kills honeybees, and nothing's being done about it. It's all astounding that this stuff actually happens. Whenever people think about the importance of any bug is important. Any part of our ecology, our ecosystem is important. But something that's responsible for so much food, there's fights every day to get neonicotinoids back on the banned list. But for a lot of people, it's just not a priority.
It's banned in Europe though, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
And I believe it's banned in Wisconsin. Wisconsin or Minnesota. I think one of them has been the only state to ban neonicotinoids.
I did not mention our next program, Barbara. It's like, there's just a couple more comments, I think, here. Barbara saying perhaps distribute milkweed at the farmer's market, as a suggestion for both monarchs and the bees. So we really had a lot of participants tonight. I really appreciate Keith, you being here, and you had a really captivated audience. I think everybody's very interested about bees. I know I have since I was in grade school. Like you mentioned the waggle dance, I loved that, that film, in the 70s when I grew up. And so anyway, Betty Michigan, what farmers market? Well, this is just kind of like an idea. We're just kind of suggesting that, farmers markets are obviously going to be starting up fairly soon. And if you got any just go to our get involved page, contact Kathy, contact Barbara, or we can even put our emails here in the chat. And like I said at the beginning of this, we're looking for all kinds of or send it to the Northwest Cook County Group email right there that Allison just put in. We're looking for all kinds of volunteers for various things, political, monarch committee, this wetland issue that's coming up too. So I think we had 42 people, participants tonight. So that was great. And it was a great presentation. Thank you very much, Keith.
Hopefully I entertained, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about bees or have a favorite beer made with honey. I always love hearing what's going on out in the world of honeybees with everybody. everybody. So thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Good
Keith.
job.
Thank
Good
you.
job.
And then we do have a recording of this, and so that will be available too. And also next month on April 8th, it's waste in the pandemic will be the discussion. You can go to our home webpage and read about that a little bit, and be sure to register, and hopefully we'll have it just as big a turnout. So anyone got anything else? Okay, well, thank you very much.